It's mind-boggling to think about the fact that out of top 20 test batters in this generation, only 3 of them average 50 plus.
When we go back to the late 1990s and the 2000s, we often talk about the Sachin Tendulkars, Jack Callis, Ricky Ponting, Rahul Dravid, and then we look at the numbers in astonishment and talk about how many runs they've scored, they average 50 plus, and all of these things. And then we talk about the now and look at these batters and then wonder why these batters don't score as much. The interesting bit is what we feel and think about is actually real. If you look at this graph that starts from 1995 to present day 2024, you will see a moving average of batters per wicket, and you will realize that there was almost an upward trend of runs scored per wicket until 2009, and since then it has only dipped, which means the amount of runs per wicket has only come down from 2009. In fact, the peak average of 37.8 was in 2009, and the lowest is this year, which is 28.8 in almost the same number of test matches. We played 41 test matches in 2009 and 14 this year as of yet.
Now, if you look at the average runs per over that have been scored from 1995 to 2024, you'll see that from 1995 to 2000, that's where the first jump comes. The runs per over moves from the 2s to the 3s. And again, when we come to 2020, there is a sudden spike once again, and the runs per over are just getting higher. In fact, 2024 is the year with the highest runs per over at 3.64. Another interesting observation is that test matches have become more result oriented now. From 1995 to 2010, the percentage of drawn test matches was 27%. Whereas from 2010 to the present day, that number has come down to 17%, a 10% decrease in the number of draws. And for that very reason, for this breakdown, we're going to be taking 2010 as the midpoint. We're going to be considering the first generation, that is 1995 to 2010, and the second generation, which is 2010 to 2024 present day.
Before we get into the batting and the bowling breakdown and talk about what's changed, like, share and subscribe, especially subscribe. Now, of course, looking at the numbers simply might tell us one story, but it's important to consider the dynamics of the sport, that is cricket itself, because apart from batters and bowlers, there's another main important factor that plays an important role in the game, and those are conditions. Now, something to consider is that in the first generation, that is between 95 to 2010, because a lot of batters since the 2000s started averaging 50 plus, which means that they score 50 plus almost every innings, and a lot of top bowlers started averaging 30 plus, which means they only started taking wickets after conceding 30 plus runs. To show the further dominance of batters in the 2000s, this is the only block of 500 tests where we have got more than 1000 test centuries. But ever since the 2010s, the bowlers have been able to fight back, and there has been some sort of a balance between a bat and ball.
To give you a more in-depth perspective of how the dynamics have changed from the previous generation to this generation, we'll also be getting into the batting and bowling statistics itself. And the first of these perspectives is the fact that the batters in this generation have batted a lot more the second time or in the second innings as compared to the batters of the previous generation. And this is also shown by the stats itself. The batsmen of the previous generation have batted 85% of all possible innings that they could have played, whereas if you compare that to the present generation, that number goes up to 89%. Also, the average balls faced by the previous generation was 56.5, whereas if you look at the current generation, that number comes down to 51.9. Now, although the change is just about 1 over, the change itself is very significant because you're considering this data over 600 plus test matches.
Now, starting off with the fast bowlers, they have done better in this generation. Fast bowlers in this generation averaged 30.2 runs per wicket, whereas the fast bowlers in the previous generation averaged 32 runs per wicket. Even in terms of strike rate, the average strike rate of the fast bowlers in this generation is 57.5 balls per wicket, whereas in the previous generation, it was 62.3 balls per wicket, which also shows that the fast bowlers are able to pick up wickets quicker than the previous generation. And this is also shown by the fact that 6 out of 14 fast bowlers who have taken 200 plus test wickets averaged 30 plus, whereas only 2 out of 16 fast bowlers who have taken 200 plus test wickets in this generation average 30 plus, which is a big difference.
The spinners of this generation are getting a wicket every 65.7 balls as compared to the spinners of the previous generation who were getting a wicket every 75.5 balls. Now, in terms of the average, there is not much change. That number has just come down from 35 to 34. And one of the biggest telling insights from this generation is that spinners have come into play more often in test matches in this generation as compared to the previous previous generation. When we look at it through numbers, the spinners in this generation have balled in 90% of all possible innings, whereas that number comes down to 83% of all innings that they could have balled in the previous generation. Also, if we look at spinners in the previous generation who've gotten 200 wickets or more, 4 out of 8 of these spinners averaged 30 plus, whereas if you come to the present generation, 4 out of 7 spinners who've gotten 200 plus wickets averaged 30 plus. Now this goes to show that while spinners in either generation have gone on to concede the same number of runs per wicket, the spinners of this generation are taking far fewer balls to get a wicket itself.
Now, all of this is correlated, right? While the batters were flourishing in the first generation, the bowlers are flourishing now. Now, if you look at the top 20 list again, in terms of the average runs per innings for the first generation, it's 50.2, whereas if you compare the top 20 batters in this generation, it's only 44. This is even simplified when you look at the fact that only 3 batters in this generation in the top 20 list average 50 plus. But if you look at the previous generation, 12 out of 20 average 50 plus in Test cricket.
And this is also reflected in the partnership data for the top 5 wickets in either generation. The average for these first 5 wickets has fallen from 40.8 runs per wicket to 38.8 runs per wicket. Surprisingly enough, the partnership runs scored by the wickets 6 to 10 has remained the same for both generations.
Now, a lot can be said about why the batters were able to score in the previous generation as compared to now, and a lot can be said about why the bowlers are doing better in this generation. And one of that is the fact that we are playing way more white ball cricket than we used to before. As compared to before, we are playing 600 more white ball matches, which is 40 matches per year. And this is not even including franchise tournaments. And what happens is that when you're playing more white ball matches internationally and franchise tournaments, and as a batter, it's more likely for you to have change in technique over the period of these matches because of the different demands of the white ball format as compared to the red ball format, which you can also see as the run rates in the test matches over the years have been increasing, especially after 2020, because the batters are just playing more shots than they used to, and this is because of the influence of the white ball format. Whereas if you look at the bowlers, they essentially need to stick to the same discipline. Apart from the slower balls and the variations that they might come up with, the technique and discipline in fact needs to be so much more higher because of the amount of cricket that's being played.
And because of the packed schedules, the biggest thing that happens is that there are no more really long tours. Gone are the days where we would see series where you would have test matches and then ODIs and T20s as well. And this also means that the preparation time for batters especially has become much lesser now, and it becomes very tough for them to transition not only from white ball to red ball, but now you also have the advent of pink ball cricket.
Now, the last but one of the main important factors is that this generation is blessed with DRS. We have a decision review system where a lot of decisions that might not have been given out previously are given out in this generation. And because of all of this, we've also seen a change in technique in the way the batters have gone about playing their defense. And if you want a video just on that and the effect of DRS in today's game, comment down below.
Now, of course, these are the factors that we could put down as numbers. There are also so many other things like the make of a leather ball, how it's changed over the years, the conditions in which cricketers play, the kinds of pitches there are. Obviously, there is a common consensus that the pitches in the 2000s were much better to bat on than right now, but this is also something that cannot be quantified by us. And lastly, and probably the biggest shift, is the fact that the mindset is so different now as compared to the previous generation. The previous generation, in fact, also admits this. Someone like an Adam Gilchrist also says that someone like a Rishabh Pant is more attacking, and the general shift in mindset has become more towards result-oriented games, which also leads for different styles of play and different strategies coming into the picture. The game has also become so much more data-oriented, and a lot of people and a lot of statisticians and analysts are involved in each team figuring out strategies for specific players.
And this has been a video on how Test cricket has changed from 1995 to present day 2024. If you have enjoyed this video, like, share and subscribe, all that good stuff. All of our links are in the description below. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. If you haven't subscribed to our newsletter, go down to our description. Our link is there too. If you want to read more on cricket, we also have a blog, so go check that out. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.